Robert Budd Dwyer. He was a Pennsylvania state treasurer whose tragic and very public death became one of the most shocking moments in American political history. Born in 1939, Dwyer was a respected public servant who had built a reputation for honesty and dedication, serving in the Pennsylvania State Senate before being elected as state treasurer in 1981. But in the mid-1980s, Dwyer's life took a devastating turn. He became embroiled in a major political scandal involving allegations of bribery and corruption related to the awarding of a state contract. Dwyer was accused of accepting a bribe in exchange for steering a lucrative contract to a particular firm. Despite maintaining his innocence throughout the investigation and trial, he was convicted in December 1986 and faced a long prison sentence, heavy fines, and the loss of his pension. The pressure on Dwyer was immense. He insisted he had been wrongly accused and that the justice system had failed him. As his sentencing date approached, Dwyer called a press conference at the Pennsylvania State Capitol on January 22, 1987. Many expected him to announce his resignation. Instead, in a shocking and deeply disturbing moment broadcast live on television, Dwyer read a prepared statement, professed his innocence, and then took his own life in front of the assembled reporters and cameras. The footage of Dwyer's death was seen by millions and sparked a national debate about the responsibilities of the media, the pressures faced by public officials, and the human cost of political scandals. His death also led to changes in how such events are covered by the press and raised questions about the fairness of the justice system. To this day, Robert Budd Dwyer's story is remembered as one of the most tragic and controversial moments in American political history. Vincent Foster. He was a highly respected attorney and deputy White House Counsel during the early Clinton administration. Born in 1945 in Hope, Arkansas, also Bill Clinton's hometown, Foster was known for his intelligence, integrity, and quiet dedication. He was a partner at the Rose Law Firm in Little Rock, where he worked with Hillary Clinton and was regarded as one of Arkansas's top legal minds. When Clinton became president in 1993, he invited Foster to join his team in Washington, D.C., an honor and a heavy burden. Foster faced complex legal and ethical issues in the White House, working long hours under intense scrutiny. The move to Washington proved difficult. He struggled with the pressure, political infighting, and media scrutiny, and was deeply affected by early scandals, including Travelgate. Despite his professionalism, Foster began showing signs of emotional distress. Friends and colleagues noticed he was withdrawn and anxious. He confided in a few close friends about his depression and feeling overwhelmed. On July 20, 1993, he was found dead by suicide in Fort Marcy Park near D.C., at age 48. His death shocked the nation and fueled conspiracy theories, though multiple investigations, by the FBI and independent counsels, confirmed it was a suicide due to depression and job-related stress. Foster's story remains a powerful reminder of the personal toll of political life, highlighting the impact of public scrutiny, intense pressure, and untreated mental health struggles. His death sparked lasting conversations about workplace stress, mental health, and the need for empathy in high-powered environments. He is remembered for both his legal brilliance and the private challenges he faced. James Forrestal. He was born in 1892, was the first U.S. Secretary of Defense and a key figure in post-World War II American history. Rising from modest roots, he became a successful Wall Street financier before entering public service. Known for his sharp intellect and tireless work ethic, he quickly gained a reputation as a top administrator in Washington. During World War II, he served as Undersecretary and then Secretary of the Navy, overseeing the Navy's massive wartime expansion and playing a vital role in the Allied victory. In 1947, President Harry Truman appointed him the first Secretary of Defense, assigning him the task of unifying the Army, Navy, and new Air Force into a single Department of Defense. The role came with daunting challenges, post-war downsizing, early Cold War tensions, and intense inter-service rivalries. The enormous pressure began to affect Forrestal's mental health. He grew anxious, fatigued, and paranoid, believing he was being targeted by political foes and foreign agents. His increasingly erratic behavior alarmed colleagues. In March 1949, Truman asked him to resign, and Forrestal was hospitalized at Bethesda Naval Hospital for what was then termed exhaustion, but would now be seen as severe depression. Despite treatment, his condition deteriorated. On May 22, 1949, just weeks after stepping down, Forrestal died by suicide, jumping from a hospital window at age 57. His death stunned the nation, highlighting the heavy and often hidden burden of high office. It spurred national reflection on mental health, stigma, and the need for compassion, even for society's most powerful. Forrestal is remembered both for shaping modern U.S. defense policy and as a sobering example of leadership's personal cost. Pierre Bérégovoy. He was a French politician who rose from modest origins to become Prime Minister of France, only to die tragically amid scandal and public scrutiny. Born in 1925 to a Ukrainian father and French mother, he began as a metal worker and union activist. His working-class background and integrity earned him respect in the Socialist Party, where he steadily advanced. He held several major roles, including Minister of Social Affairs and Finance, gaining recognition for his pragmatic economic reforms. In 1992, President François Mitterrand appointed him prime minister during a time of economic difficulty and rising unemployment. Despite his commitment, Bérégovoy's term faced criticism over economic policy. His biggest setback came from a scandal. He was accused of receiving a favorable loan from a businessman later convicted of fraud. Though never charged and denying wrongdoing, the relentless media scrutiny damaged his reputation and mental health. On May 1, 1993, weeks after a major electoral defeat and his resignation, Bérégovoy died by suicide near his home in Nevis at age 67. His death shocked the nation and ignited debate about the pressure on public figures, media responsibility, and the emotional toll of political life. He is remembered for his service to France and as a stark reminder of the personal cost of power. Jiang Qing, he was born in 1914, was one of modern China's most controversial and powerful women. She began as an actress before marrying Mao Zedong, founder of the People's Republic of China. Her prominence rose sharply during the Cultural Revolution, 1960s-70s, when she became the most visible member of the Gang of Four, a radical political faction. Jiang was known for her hardline ideology and her role in purging intellectuals, artists, and political opponents. She became a feared symbol of the Cultural Revolution's brutality. But after Mao's death in 1976, the tide turned. The Gang of Four was arrested and blamed for the decade's chaos. Jiang was put on trial and famously stated, "I was Chairman Mao's dog. I bit whomever he asked me to bite." She was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. In prison, Jiang's health and spirit declined. She lived in isolation, far from the world she once dominated. On May 14, 1991, she died by suicide in a hospital bathroom at age 77, reportedly leaving a note expressing bitterness and betrayal. Her death marked the close of a dark era. To many, she remains a villain. To others, a tragic figure consumed by power and revolution. Jiang Qing's story is a stark reminder of how political ambition, shifting tides, and public pressure can converge in a profoundly tragic end. Yukio Mishima. Yukio Mishima was one of Japan's most celebrated and controversial writers, as well as a passionate political activist whose life and death left a lasting mark on Japanese culture. Born Kimitake Hiraka in 1925, Mishima rose to fame as a novelist, playwright, and essayist, earning international acclaim for his literary works that explored themes of beauty, death, and the conflict between tradition and modernity. But Mishima was more than just a writer. He was a complex and driven individual, obsessed with the idea of restoring what he saw as Japan's lost honor and traditional values in the post-war era. Deeply disillusioned by the country's embrace of westernization and the decline of the samurai spirit, Mishima founded his own private militia, the Tatenokai, or Shield Society. This group was made up mostly of young students who shared his vision of a return to imperial rule and the values of Bushido, the way of the warrior. On November 25, 1970, Mishima's lifelong fascination with the intersection of art, politics, and death reached its dramatic and tragic climax. Along with several members of the Tatenokai, he entered a military base in Tokyo, took a commanding officer hostage, and demanded that the Japanese self-defense forces rise up and restore power to the emperor. When his impassioned speech was met with ridicule and rejection, Mishima retreated to the commander's office and performed seppuku, a ritual samurai suicide, ending his life at the age of 45. Mishima's death shocked Japan and the world. Some saw him as a brilliant artist who took his ideals to the ultimate extreme, while others viewed his final act as a misguided and theatrical gesture. Regardless of perspective, Yukio Mishima's legacy endures, not only through his influential body of literature, but also as a symbol of the intense struggle between tradition and change, and the personal cost of living by one's convictions. Pál Teleki. Pál Teleki was a Hungarian statesman, academic, and twice prime minister whose life and death were deeply shaped by the turmoil of World War II. Born in 1879, Teleki was a respected geographer and university professor before entering politics. He first served as prime minister in the early 1920s, but it was his second term, beginning in 1939, that would define his legacy and ultimately his tragic end. Teleki took office at a time when Hungary was caught between the rising powers of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. As war swept across Europe, Teleki faced impossible choices. He wanted to protect Hungary's independence and avoid the devastation of another world war, but the country was under immense pressure from Hitler's Germany to join the Axis powers and support their military campaigns. Teleki tried to walk a tightrope, signing a treaty of friendship with Yugoslavia in hopes of keeping Hungary out of the conflict, while also trying to appease Germany. But in April 1941, Hitler demanded that Hungary allow German troops to cross its territory for an invasion of Yugoslavia, violating the very treaty Teleki had just signed. Teleki was faced with a moral and political crisis: betray an ally, or defy a powerful neighbor and risk Hungary's destruction. Unable to reconcile these conflicting loyalties and overcome by the weight of his responsibilities, Pál Teleki took his own life on April 3, 1941, leaving behind a note expressing his anguish over the infamous betrayal of Yugoslavia. He was 61 years old. Teleki's suicide sent shockwaves through Hungary and the wider world. Many saw it as a final act of protest, a desperate attempt to preserve his honor and the integrity of his country in the face of overwhelming external pressure. Today, Pál Teleki is remembered as a tragic figure, a leader who was forced to make impossible choices in one of history's darkest hours, and whose death stands as a somber reminder of the personal cost of political power during times of war. Getulio Vargas. He was born in 1882, was one of Brazil's most influential leaders, celebrated as the father of the poor, yet remembered for a deeply tragic end. Rising from a rural background, he served as president twice, first as a dictator, 1930 to 1945, then as a democratically elected leader, 1951 to 1954. A skilled populist, Vargas introduced sweeping social reforms, labor rights, minimum wage, and social security that transformed life of millions and modernized Brazil. He became a symbol of hope for the working class. However, his leadership was also marked by authoritarianism. During his first term, he dissolved Congress and suppressed opposition. After his 1945 ousting, he returned in 1951 via democratic election. But his second term faced economic troubles, political unrest, and growing opposition from the military and media. By 1954, under intense pressure and accused of corruption, Vargas was politically isolated. On August 24, 1954, inside the presidential palace in Rio de Janeiro, he died by suicide, shooting himself in the heart. His dramatic note blamed his enemies and ended with, "I leave life to enter history." His death shocked the nation. Riots erupted, and many mourned the loss of a leader who had stood with the poor and challenged elites. Vargas remains a complex figure, visionary reformer and authoritarian ruler, whose tragic end underscored the immense burden of power. Roh Moo-hyun. Roh Moo-hyun was a South Korean president whose life story is one of hope, struggle, and ultimately, tragedy. Born in 1946 to a poor farming family, Roh worked his way up from humble beginnings, becoming a human rights lawyer known for defending students and labor activists during South Korea's years of military dictatorship. His reputation for honesty and his commitment to democracy made him a symbol of change in a country yearning for reform. In 2003, Roh was elected president, riding a wave of support from young voters and those disillusioned with the political establishment. His presidency was marked by efforts to fight corruption, promote transparency, and improve relations with North Korea. Roh's plain-spoken style and willingness to challenge the status quo earned him both passionate supporters and fierce critics. But his time in office was not without controversy. Roh faced constant opposition from conservative politicians and the media, and his approval ratings fluctuated throughout his term. After leaving office in 2008, he returned to his rural hometown, hoping for a quieter life. However, in 2009, Roh and his family became the focus of a high-profile corruption investigation. The relentless scrutiny and public humiliation took a heavy toll on him. On May 23, 2009, Roh Moo-hyun died by suicide near his home, leaving behind a note expressing his sorrow for disappointing the people and his loved ones. He was 62 years old. His death shocked South Korea, sparking an outpouring of grief and soul-searching across the nation. Many saw Roh as a victim of a harsh political environment and a justice system that can be unforgiving, even to those who dedicate their lives to public service. Roh Moo-hyun's legacy is complex. He is remembered as a champion of democracy and social justice, a leader who inspired millions with his integrity and vision. Alan Garcia, born 1949, was one of Peru's most prominent and polarizing figures, serving twice as president. A gifted orator and rising star in APRA, Peru's oldest political party, he was elected in 1985 at just 36, offering hope and reform to a country in crisis. His first term began with high expectations but quickly deteriorated. Populist policies triggered hyperinflation, economic collapse, and escalating violence from the Maoist shining path. By 1990, Garcia's approval had collapsed, and he left office disgraced, spending years in exile amid corruption allegations. Resilient, Garcia returned and staged a political comeback, winning re-election in 2006. His second term was more stable, marked by economic growth and modernization efforts. Yet controversy persisted, with recurring accusations of corruption and abuse of power. In 2019, Garcia's life took a tragic turn. Facing arrest over alleged bribery and money laundering tied to the Odebrecht scandal, a massive corruption case that swept Latin America, he insisted on his innocence. On April 17th, as police arrived to detain him, Garcia shot himself in his bedroom. His death shocked Peru and reignited debate over political pressure, accountability, and legacy. To some, he was a visionary. To others, a symbol of entrenched corruption. His story remains a stark reminder of how power, scandal, and personal legacy can collide with tragic consequences. Salvador Allende. Salvador Allende was a Chilean physician and politician whose life and death became a symbol of hope, struggle, and tragedy during the Cold War. Born in 1908, Allende spent decades fighting for social justice and equality, eventually becoming the first Marxist to be democratically elected president in Latin America. When he took office in 1970, he promised to transform Chile through sweeping reforms, nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and expanding education and healthcare. Allende's vision inspired millions, but it also made him a target. His socialist policies alarmed powerful interests both inside and outside Chile, including the United States, which feared the spread of communism in the region. The country became deeply polarized, with economic turmoil, strikes, and political violence escalating throughout his presidency. By 1973, Chile was on the brink. On September 11th, the military, led by General Augusto Pinochet and backed by elements of the CIA, launched a violent coup to overthrow Allende's government. As tanks surrounded the presidential palace and fighter jets bombed the building, Allende refused to surrender. In his final radio address, he spoke to the nation with calm and dignity, vowing to remain true to his principles and urging his supporters not to give up hope. Rather than be captured, Salvador Allende took his own life inside the presidential palace. He was 65 years old. His death marked the end of Chile's brief experiment with democratic socialism and the beginning of a brutal military dictatorship that would last for nearly 2 decades. Allende's legacy is complex and deeply felt. For many, he remains a martyr for democracy and social justice, a leader who died defending his ideals. His final words and tragic end continue to inspire movements for freedom and equality around the world, serving as a powerful reminder of the personal cost of political conviction in the face of overwhelming opposition. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler remains one of the most infamous and reviled figures in world history, a dictator whose actions led to the devastation of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler rose to power in Germany during the 1930s, becoming Chancellor and later Führer, or Supreme Leader, of the Nazi regime. His vision of a totalitarian state, built on racism, antisemitism, and aggressive expansionism, plunged Europe into chaos and resulted in the deaths of millions. By 1945, Hitler's so-called Thousand-Year Reich was collapsing. Allied forces were closing in on Berlin from all sides, and the city was being reduced to rubble. Inside his underground bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's world had shrunk to a few dimly lit rooms, surrounded by loyalists and haunted by paranoia. He refused to flee, insisting he would never be captured alive. On April 30, 1945, as Soviet troops fought their way through the streets above, Hitler took his own life alongside his wife, Eva Braun, whom he had married just hours before. Their bodies were quickly burned, as he had ordered, to prevent them from being displayed by the enemy. News of Hitler's suicide spread rapidly, signaling the final collapse of Nazi Germany and the end of the war in Europe just days later. Hitler's death was not mourned, but it did mark the end of one of history's darkest chapters. For many, it was a moment of relief and closure, but it also left behind a legacy of trauma, loss, and unanswered questions about how such evil could take hold. Today, Hitler's suicide is remembered not as a tragedy in the traditional sense, but as the final act of a man responsible for unimaginable suffering, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, hatred, and fanaticism.